My pleasure. My
Cool.
pleasure.
Let's kick off then. So
Okay.
welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. I know you guys everyone's super busy, but hopefully this will be worth your weight in gold in terms of time. This is obviously a masterclass as part of kind of the Founder Nation community. We run pretty regular masterclasses on a range of different topics that founders are keen to learn a little bit more about, become a little bit more knowledgeable in. SJ is a community member and kindly volunteered her time to give us 40 minutes of her time to kind of go through some of the common kind of things that the fundamentals, right, of what founders need to have in place from a legal standing point, and maybe also a chance to go through some of your guys' questions with maybe things that you're dealing with in your kind of day-to-day at the moment. She probably can't answer every one of your questions, but we'll do our best. If you guys want to submit your questions, you're welcome just to turn your camera and mic on and jump in. But there's also a Q&A function in the bottom right. If you click the 9-dot grid in the bottom right, there's a Q&A function there. You can pop in your questions in that space. We're going to do our best to pick them up as we go. But if we miss anything, I'm sure we can follow up. SJ will make herself available as well afterwards for any kind of follow-up questions as well. And we'll probably have some time at the end as well to go through. But if we miss anything on this call, we can. I'm sure SJ will be happy to pick it up via email or via phone call afterwards. And the meeting's recorded as well. We'll be sending that out afterwards in case you want to recap anything. So wicked. I'll hand over to SJ, who's the expert on the matter. Maybe you can start with a quick intro to yourself, SJ. What's your background?
Of course. Hello, everybody. I hope you're all good. I hope you've had a good Easter. Hello. My name's Sarah-Jane. Most people know me as SJ. So please just do reach out to me. So what's my background? So I originally started off at Linklaters, which is one of the big Magic Circle City firms, focusing on debt and equity, capital markets, investments and raises. I then moved for my sins into securitization, if any of you know what that is, but it basically means long hours and painful, a lot of pain. I then was at Goldman's and then saw the light and yeah, thanks Ben, you know exactly how that feels. I then started my own business back in 2010. So completely separate to the legal sector, and threw myself into being an SME. So I know exactly what it feels like to be a founder and an entrepreneur and have to go through the nightmare, the joys and tribulations of running your own business, wanting to throw the printer out the window on several occasions. I ran that for 10 years and I went through the whole process of hiring people, firing people, raising money, doing SEIS, EIS, and then through the whole gamut of selling the business at the end. In 2021, I set up Farringford Legal with the sole purpose of supporting small medium enterprises who are ambitious and focused on growth, and that's what we've been doing for 5 years. We're a team of 32 now, and we cover pretty much anything that you're going to need as a business, apart from property and litigation, because I can't be bothered to fight with anybody. So effectively we covered corporate, commercial, finance, IP, employment, HR, data protection, AI, tax, restructuring. I could go on, but basically we can support you, and the whole idea is that we are there by your side. So I know lawyers have a pretty bad reputation, and we're trying to change the image of lawyers one happy client at a time. That is our kind of ethos. So I'm here today to kind of try and help you put into context when you need legal advice and when you don't. Try and answer your questions as much as I can. I'm going to caveat it, obviously, as Andrew said, basically by saying I can't answer your questions and any specific details, you'll have to contact me directly. And clearly there's no liability on my side for any advice that I give today, just to make sure that's very clear. But
it's a legal masterclass as a disclaimer at the start.
It is a legal masterclass, there's got to be a disclaimer in there. But effectively, my purpose here is trying to be as commercial and pragmatic as possible to help you all. Please, I've got a couple of slides. Don't worry, this is not death by PowerPoint. I've got a couple of slides to go through. Please interrupt me anytime. I'm here to help. So if there's any questions you have at any point in time, raise your hand, shout, turn your camera on. This is meant to be interactive. This is meant to support you all. So do let me know. So if we can move on from that aspect, I will. So as I said, legal headaches to smart decisions. This is just a kind of a practical framework for you all to help you scale practically with legal advice in mind. So it has to be said, as I mentioned, most people, when it comes to running their first business, do not like engaging with lawyers. They see them as expensive. They see them as basically a pain in the arse. They have this image of marble floors and mahogany dining tables, and generally have an idea that it's just going to cost them an absolute fortune and they can do better. They also kind of say, well, I don't need a lawyer because I don't have a problem. I think you should rephrase that and say, I don't need a lawyer because I don't have a problem yet. And the key thing really is, if you get in the foundations early enough, you won't have the problem, or at least you're 10 times less likely to have the problem. So it's the foundations that really matter. If you can get the foundations in place, the massive costs and headaches and nightmare that you associate with dealing with lawyers is 10 times less likely to happen. So most people sit there going, oh my God, lawyers are expensive. Well, they are if they're trying to sort out a problem. If you're putting in the foundations to start with, A, it's much more cost effective, and B, you're less likely to have the problem. So it's a catch-22 situation. Get the lawyers early, and then you're less likely to have a problem, which is then going to cost you a fortune with lawyers later on. So try and be proactive rather than reactive is my key advice. Get in the basics early on, because you'll see that return on investment much sooner, effectively. Investors will respect you for it. Your clients and your customers will see it as much more professional and much more straightforward, and they know they're dealing with a proper entity rather than back of a fag packet, ChatGPT style crap. And you will avoid the massive overcomplicated jargon heavy rubbish that actually a lot of lawyers can throw at you, because you keep it simple. Now, I know we live in a very woke society, but at Farringford we like a lot of kissing, and I'm not being dodgy here. We like to keep it simple, stupid, basically. And that's all you need. You need to assess what are your priorities, what actually matters right now that you need to get in place. Avoid being too complicated. You don't need to be. And basically don't delay until it's urgent, because then you really will be in the proverbial. So I'd say that's my first thing, is focus on your priorities and get the foundations in sooner rather than later. And then you probably won't have to deal with lawyers very often.
Cool.
So everyone's happy with that?
Yeah.
Good. Just a very, very clear thing. So what are the 5 legal things I would strongly suggest you put in place to avoid having your problems? So when you start out, I would lock in the basics really early on. Now, for those of you who are co-founders, that essentially means making sure you have a shareholders agreement in place. Now, a shareholders agreement is one of the cornerstones if you're in business with anybody else that you should really, really make sure that you have as soon as possible when you start a business, because it basically sets out the constitution of how your business is going to act, how decision making is going to work, how the shares work, how ownership works, who's doing what and where, what happens if one of you wants to sell, what happens if you want to raise investment, worst case scenarios, what happens if one of you dies, because that does happen, and I'll tell you about a very real scenario that we're dealing with at the moment. What happens if one of you gets divorced? Then where do the shares go? Do they stay in the business, or do they go to the ex-spouse? So again, something that you really need to think about. One of the deals that we have been working on, and I kid you not, is about for 3.5 years, is with a brilliant business that has been going for about 50 odd years, and the 4 founders were in their 60s and 70s when we started working with them. About a week from signing the shareholders agreement, which they didn't have in place, one of them died. Now that meant that his shares immediately in his will went to his daughter who was living in South America. So can you begin to imagine the nightmare of going through probate, trying to contact her? She had no interest in the business, no knowledge of the business really. And then we had to go through that whole scenario. Probate takes forever, as you guys will know. That by the time we finally got her to sell her shares back to the remaining 3 shareholders, another shareholder died like a year later. And the same thing, he was divorced, but his shares went to his ex-spouse. So we had the same problem all over again.
Yeah.
And we're still working on this. So it's 3 years later, we're still working on this. I think it's probably one of the most lucrative deals we've ever done because we're still working on it. So if you think, oh, right now I'm best mates with my co-founder, we love each other, everything is lovely, we're all happy together. Well, you may not always be happy together. The best relationships fall apart, as we all know. And what happens if you fall out, and what happens to those shares, and how do you value them, and if one person wants to leave or one person wants to go and do something else. So that is why the shareholders agreement is a really important document, because it is the one thing that if you don't have it in place, it could be a real mess. The other thing that is very important to is that if you then get investment in, early stage investment like angel investors, etc., will simply just sign up to that shareholders agreement. So it's really quite straightforward. You just have a subscription agreement, an adherence agreement to the existing shareholders agreement, and it's much simpler. So as you can see, you're already beginning to save money because you don't have to create this whole thing and then start negotiating with an angel investor to put a shareholders agreement in place.
Yeah.
So that is the really key thing. And also you can build in stuff like EMI schemes, option pools, all of that kind of stuff. So you think forward, basically think how you're going to take on talent, think how you're going to recruit people. Are you going to give them shares in the future, options in the future to entice them to stay on with you, to come in when you don't have enough money to give them really nice salaries? You build that all into your shareholders agreement and articles. And before you ask me how much is this all going to cost, roughly it should cost you, for decent advice, somewhere between £4,000 to £7,000. It depends on the shareholders, it depends on the rights you want to put in there, the number of shareholders, the number of different classes, A, B, C, D shares, etc., the rights, the obligations of the shareholders themselves. But in general, that's what you should be looking at. That £4,000 to £7,000, by the way, is nothing compared to what it would cost you in time and effort to sort out a problem when one of your founders dies or decides that they don't like you anymore.
What do you guys, chuck in with your questions if you're dealing in these situations, or want to know a little bit more about particularly the shareholder agreement side of things. I mean, it comes up regularly with founders as one of the when I meet founders and we talk about what their most expensive mistake has been, it's often a co-founder split up, and it's the number one death cause of death in startups, right? So like, what are the ways what are the types of clauses or protections you've seen put in place to prevent a founder moving on early doors split? How can you manage that amicably and in a way that doesn't decimate the business or really jeopardize its trajectory?
That's where you put everything into the shareholders agreement. So in effect, in the shareholders agreement, it says if one person leaves or choose to leave, the other person can choose to buy them out. If the company has enough distributable reserves, the company can buy back those shares. And there's lots of different ways of doing share buybacks. If the business really isn't worth anything at some point in time, then the founder can gift the shares back. There are obviously tax consequences. So if the business has begun to make money, has begun to be of value, then there is tax consequences for both the exiting shareholder and potentially for the company itself. Share buybacks can be quite a complicated process, so that is definitely when it's worth getting lawyers in place. But you build that into the shareholders agreement. So you can build in, quite commonly within a shareholders agreement, you've got good and bad leaver provisions. So good leaver is where it's amicable, but they want to leave, they want to move on. How does that work? What you did is you build in a valuation. How do you value the shares? And you build in basically a process within the shareholders agreement that says, if you're leaving on good terms, or you're critically ill, or heaven forbid, you've died and your estate has to buy back those shares from, sorry, the company has to buy back those shares from the estate. Those are kind of what are called good leaver provisions. I know that doesn't sound so good if you're dead, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Those are kind of those provisions that you build into the shareholders agreement. Alternatively, you've then got bad leaver provisions. So you've got bad leaver provisions where somebody has done something ridiculously stupid, brought the company into disrepute, done something they shouldn't do, there's a fight, whatever it might be. Then you've got bad leaver provisions. And all of those things are already built into the shareholders agreement. So you are preempting a founder split. You're literally, and the fact of the matter is if you've already built in all of those things into the shareholders agreement, into your contract already, it's very difficult for somebody then to argue the situation because they've agreed it. It's down in paper. It's written there already. So at that point in time, you basically say, look, we covered this in the agreement. This is what happens in this scenario. It's quite clear. We know this position is going to happen. The company's going to buy back the shares, or et cetera, et cetera. So you cut down that fight quickly, very, very quickly, because it's all written in the document already. There's a process already set out.
Well, I guess I've got two questions off the back of that. One would be, obviously, a lot of businesses when they fundraise, they get a paper value based on a valuation set by an investor, a VC maybe, but the actual cash in the balance and the balance sheet and the P&L haven't caught up with that valuation yet. The investors have invested in some IP that has some potential, and so the ability to buy back shares in terms of having the liquidity to actually buy shares back from a leaving founder is restricted because you've raised let's say £1 million in a seed round, and you've raised it at a sort of a £7 million valuation, and then someone leaves with 40% of their shares. How have you seen that, like those types of situation? That's the type of situation that I've seen some founders be in. How do you navigate that where the paper value is maybe more than what the actual business is, more than what the business actually is valued at?
Yeah, so there's a big difference between, so evaluations can come in a whole heap of range and sizes. So for example, your valuation for an EMI scheme, you want it to be as low as possible because that gives you the best tax advantage. There's a difference between your enterprise value, your equity value. So there's a big difference between what the value. So when investors are doing, they're investing in the future. So they're investing in the potential of the business. So there's lots of businesses, Ocado being one of them, that failed to make a profit for years and years and years. So actually, their value was pretty much null and void. There was nothing there. There was just a whole heap of debt, effectively. But investors ploughed money into Ocado on the basis of its enterprise. So basically the total value of the future, of the potential, etc. So when you're trying to exit a business, you need to get a separate valuation. It's not the same valuation as your investment. Value in. So it's a very difficult your enterprise value is everything, what the shareholders own, your debt, all those other kind of things. You have to have a look at it. So that's why within your shareholders agreement, you go to an independent valuer effectively to say, well, actually, at this moment in time, what is the value of the business realistically in terms of its assets, in terms of what it's turning over? But then you have to look at all the debts and the liabilities within the business, which is very different to when an investor invests in you, because it's investing in the future and the promise of a higher return later on. So there are different ways of valuing it, and that's why you don't take the investment value, take the actual value of what is on paper.
Cool. Okay. Cool. Well, let's keep moving. Unless anyone else, guys, you've got any questions as we go, keep use the Q&A function in the bottom right. I just remembered. But let's move on to IP.
Yeah. Sorry, there is one more thing I should probably say. So on hang on. Sorry, I've lost you all. So on the on your founder relationships, there's another key document that loads of people complete, and then it links into the IP, by the way. It's called your director service agreement. Now, as founding directors, you should definitely have a service agreement. Now, that's an employment, essentially it's an employment agreement, but with added duties and obligations because you are a company's house director. So there's statutory obligations and further things in there. There's also kind of very key IP clauses in there, confidentiality clauses and restrictive covenants that prevent you from taking your idea and disappearing off and going to a competitor or using it elsewhere. That's a really key document because it assigns all of your great ideas to the business. Because other than that, all of those ideas that you currently have at the moment about, you creating something, whether it's tech, whether it's whatever it might be, all your business plans, all your ideas, or everything like that at the moment is sitting with you as an individual. Unless you have assigned that to the company, the company doesn't own it. So it's basically a shell. And you as an individual, you own that. You own the copyright because copyright falls on you individually unless you assign it to the company.
It's done by a director service agreement.
It's done by a director service agreement. So in an employment contract, this is a standard provision.
But often founders set up businesses without setting up a director service agreement.
Exactly. So founders tend to be and by the way, totally guilty of this. It took me a year to set up my own director service agreements. And in fact, I've updated all my team's employment contracts, but I haven't updated my own. We're very bad at this kind of stuff because we go, oh, it's fine because we own the company. We're fine. But you have to think of yourself. It's very, I'm going to say bipolar, but it's actually four entities that you've got to think out. There's 4 very distinct legal entities within a business. So there's yourself as an employee. As a fact, because you are an employee. Essentially because you may not be being paid, but you are an employee because there are rights and obligations that the company owes to you, and you should be an employee, by the way. You should have an employment contract because if the company goes down, you can claim statutory redundancy from the government if you're paying yourself the minimum 12,500 a year. So you can claim statutory redundancy. So that's something that if your business does go down, you can actually claim money back. So don't lose that. So you've got yourself as an employee. You've got yourself as a director. So you've got rights and obligations as a director, company's house director, statutory rights and obligations. You've got yourself as a shareholder, again, completely different hat that you're wearing. And then you've got the business, which is, again, its own separate legal entity, limited entity. So you've got 4 separate legal entities in there. And you might say, well, actually, that seems a bit weird because I am the business and the business doesn't work without me. Well, yes, but because you've set up a limited company, all your liabilities are limited for the most part, not all the time, because you do have there are directors' duties, etc. But for the most part, all liabilities are limited within that company. That's why you've set up a company and not acted as a sole trader. That's the difference between the two, essentially. So if you've got massive debts, those debts will never fall on you as an individual, as a director or an employee or a shareholder for that matter, because everything is contained within the limited company. If you set yourself as a sole trader, all debts and liabilities fall on you, which is the key difference. So when it comes to IP, you need to make sure from the outset that all that IP is assigned to the business, whether it's from you as a director or from contractors and all co-founders for that matter. Because your assets, especially in a tech-driven world, all those assets are really key to that business, and investors are going to look to see if that IP is registered with the company or not. So it's a really important question, and then equally, a really important factor to get in place as soon as possible. Equally, you've got things like your trademark. Get your trademark in sooner rather than later, your logo and your name trademark, because you don't want to go through all of this and then suddenly find somebody nicks your name or what you need to do. So that's a kind of, again, your trademark is a key IP. And I noticed there was a question that came up. Sorry. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a quick question on the shareholder stuff. Off-the-shelf shareholder agreement's good enough to, I suppose it's talking to things like, I think there's some platforms out there that do like all the, like, I suppose the logic, right? I get the logic is like, there's a lot of startups out there doing a lot of this type of shareholder agreement. Presumably there are some platforms who do presumably pretty good templates on this, given that it's quite a common thing to put in place. So is that like the best option, to pay for access to a platform that has some good options for this that are templated?
Yeah, If you're very early stages, then the likes of vested, for example, are probably good enough.
Yeah.
Um, at the very simple end.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of seed legals, and I don't know. And Founder Catalyst is another one. I think that, and that quite often we do refer people to vested. So when you are really early stage, then I would say, and it's just two of you, then I would say yes, it's fine. Go with the likes of a vested thing. Keep it as long as it keeps it simple. And actually, you know what, in terms of costs, seed legals tends to be more expensive. Vested, I think, tends to be maybe £1,500 cheaper than us, I would say, because you're dealing with a platform, and they do have good. And by the way, we have a very good relationship with Vested. They do a good cap table raise. They can do all of that kind of stuff. So those platforms are for early stage businesses.
Good.
Fine. I don't have a problem with that. What I have seen is when it starts to get more complicated, because again, it's only as good as the information that you put in. Now, these guys are not lawyers. I just want to really clarify this. These guys are not lawyers. They can give you advice, general advice. They can give you a kind of a rough overview. But what I tend to find sometimes is, and I know we're going to move on to this with, for example, using ChatGPT or Claude or AI, is people will use vested, and then they will come to us and they will say, can you just double check this works? And that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with double checking stuff.
Yeah, so it's a good platform if you're early stage and keeping it simple.
It's a good platform if it's early stage and keeping it simple. If there's just two of you, you're the same share, same class of shares, and you're not, yeah, it's absolutely fine. Yeah. It's also okay if you're going through your first round. They do EIS, SEIS very, very quickly. Yeah. So again, don't, I think for me, the best thing is putting the right foundations in place, and where you're cash strapped, then, or bootstrapping, I should say, then probably it works. If you're slightly beyond your first raise, then I would start saying, look at coming back to lawyers.
Yeah, at which point you probably have a more budget to do so that works. Yeah. Cool. Let's keep moving. I know we've got to get through 4 more as well. So
when it comes to like T's and C's and things like that, it's kind of a battle of the terms, and you've got David and Goliath. You guys are small, and you're maybe dealing with much bigger counterparts who might want to impose their own T's and C's on you. I still think it's worth having your own terms and conditions in place, because it just looks much more professional. And if you're a tech business, then definitely you need website terms of use, you need your data privacy policy, you need to have your terms and conditions online, you need to make it very, very clear how you're operating, what you're doing, and so on and so forth. You need to make sure you have very clear payment terms, and liability caps are really important. Do not forget your professional indemnity insurance, because you need to make sure that actually you are covering your asses. So, and also, if you can't explain it, you can't enforce it. So be very clear about what you can and can't do. If you're going to put something into ChatGPT or Claude, then I would say, I'll come on to your question, thanks. Then I would say, we're totally aware as lawyers that this is going to happen. Just get it double checked, okay? Because you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes it's the prompts that you put into these things they can create. They're getting better, I will say, as I said to Andrew earlier, they are getting better. But I do think sometimes you need to make sure that you really understand what you've put in and what it means. So know your obligations. So even if it's just spending a couple of hours with us, and by the way, my charge out rate is 335. So it's like 700 quid to basically double check something and just make sure you're covered. And that, yeah. So the question, how do you negotiate more favorable terms with large clients? I've
dealt with this a lot. Like this is difficult, right? Like when you want to sign an enterprise client or a supplier, and they're just like, these are the terms, or piss off, basically. And as a small business, you feel a little bit. It's a good question.
So I would say choose your 5 biggest battles. So we have dealt with this on a lot of occasions. So clients come to us and say, we've received this contract from our client. They're a big guy. They've basically said, take it or leave it. right, number one, don't take it or leave it. Number two, pick your 5 battles, your 5 top red flags. The reason why we have discovered this over time is that your 5 top red flags will get dealt with by the person you're dealing with more than 5, and they'll refer it into legal. And then it gets a pain, and then everyone goes no, and then everyone goes computer says no, and then you get frustrated, and then it's a pain in the ass. So choose your top 5 and basically say, thanks very much, but these are our top 5. Don't review the whole thing. Don't find a comma or a full stop or all the other kind of stuff that lawyers are very good at finding. Look at your 5 top red flags, which will probably be your liability, your indemnity, your payment terms, key IP matters, confidentiality issues. So there's probably all your 5 top things, and go in on those 5, because they are likely to change those 5 things, and only 5 things only, because you're not asking for the world. If they go for all 5, brilliant. See if you can do your next 5. Your kind of amber ones, your kind of, I'd like to have this if possible, but I know I'm pushing my limits situation. So we call it our traffic light system of reviewing a contract. We'll go in, depending on who the client is, who the supplier, who the client is versus our client. We will go in and we will look at what are the 5 things, and you'll find that most people, not all the time, will accept the 5 rather than a complete rewrite. So I would probably go in on those terms, but equally know your worth, because if you're entering into terms that are really negative, then do you really want this client? Like if they've got 180-day payment terms, which is what we've seen in the past, is that actually really helping you? Do you actually really want this client?
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Interesting.
Moving on to compliance, data protection, and AI. Oh my God, this is like the biggest area. And there's so much process and so much bureaucracy and so much admin. But if you're not registered with the Information Commissioner's Office, you need to be. That's first and foremost. It's a statutory obligation. Number 2, you really do need to look at how your data privacy policies, data protection policies, data protection notice for your employees and in contractors. You need to have all of these things in place. It is a legal obligation. 95% of data breaches are carried out by people by human error. So bear in mind, you need to have a decent data privacy policy. You need to tell people what data you're collecting, how you're collecting it, who you're sharing it with, their rights and obligations with regards updating or deleting that data, how long you hold it for. All of those things you need to have in place. It's really important, because if there is a breach and you fall foul of, and by the way, you have to report a sorry, Nikki's like putting stuff in here because Nikki works with me, so she's like letting you know what to do. Follow whatever Nikki's saying. She's right. It's really important to have those policies in place, because that's where you'll end up with the big fines, because it's not the fact that a breach occurred that's the issue. It's the fact that you haven't followed the law that's the issue. And there are, and you can see, you've seen it with Marks and Spencers, you saw it with Co-op. Cybersecurity comes in and there's a massive breach of data and the whole thing goes out the window. Okay, British Airways has been massively fined by the ICO because they've breached data.
If you could just summarize that, what is the smallest number of things an early stage startup should have in place? Is it
you read my mind.
a half decent privacy policy, then some terms and conditions in contracts with employees and contractors? Like, what talk me through, like, what's like the minimum number of things an early stage startup should have?
Okay, so for data on the data protection side, you effectively need 3 key things. You need a data privacy policy, which is the external, which needs to be very clear. You can have a link on it on your emails, and you should have it on your website. That tells anybody that who you are dealing with, all of those things that I mentioned, the data you're going to collect, what you're going to do with it, who you're going to share it with, etc., etc. That's a very key document. Then the reverse side of the coin is your data protection policy. That effectively says the same thing, but is internal facing. So it tells anybody internally, your contractors, your employees, anybody, what you do with that data. So it's a kind of, there's 2 sides of it. You then have your data privacy notice for employees and contractors, your DPNE. That is because you are collecting data on your employees and your contractors. So you need to tell them what you're going to do with the data, what data you're going to collect on them, etc., etc. Those are your 3 basic data privacy policies.
Right.
Then within your terms and conditions, you should definitely have a data protection clause that basically tells people that you are going to be dealing with their data. So they're very clear things that you need to do. So that's a very standard clause. That is your basic minimum. If you are larger than that and you are kind of 2-3 years in, then what I would generally suggest you do is we have something which is called a data gap analysis. And that basically runs through from start to finish what you need to have. Now, we're dealing with a client at the moment who is turning over something like 30 million, and they've only just realized they should be registered with the ICO. So even big companies, right, miss this or don't have all the necessary things in place. So it's something that I would generally say, read up about. There's loads of information on our website. Nikki's been sharing stuff, but there's loads of information on our website as to what you need to do. There you go, your step-by-step guide to GDPR. Nikki shared it with you. There's loads of different things that you need to have to think about and put in place. If you're using AI, there's normally, well, everyone's using AI, so what am I talking about? Your data privacy policy should have in there a clause that says we will use AI and how we're going to use it. Oh, on your IP, make sure that you have website terms of use that stops people from scraping your website for data and confidential information and IP and all that other kind of stuff, because once it's gone, it's gone. So make sure that you have a clause within your data privacy policy that deals with your use of AI and how you're going to be using it. And number 2, that you have something within your website terms that says basically AI can't scrape your website. Sorry, I know I'm kind of dumping a whole load of stuff on you guys. And you might think, holy shit, what am I going to do? Sorry, very legal term that. But it's quite, I guess what we're trying to say is, where should you spend your legal budget? Where does it matter the most? And I would definitely start with your founder relationships, your director service agreement. Really have a view on your IP, and then look at your basic data awareness and have those basics in place. Because effectively, what we often see is that first time round funders don't have that in place. Second time round, they probably have a little bit more money, I understand that, but they actually see the necessities of having those foundations clearly mapped. So when you're budgeting for your business, I would say, as a guide, putting everything in place that you probably need is probably 10 to 15K, the lot. But don't do it all at once, okay? It's because we all know that cash flow is key. So you can spread it out over a period of time to get everything in place.
Yeah.
And the way we work, by the way, is always on a fixed fee basis for anything like this. And we spread all our payment installments out over a period of time. So just take on each project as it comes, but just think in your mind, right, I've got 6 months and I need to put all of this stuff in place and basically market it, spread it out over that time.
There's a good question here. From a marketing perspective, we want to maximize share of LLM. So I think this is talking to like GEO or like being ranked in AI, I'm presuming, and being ranked as an authority by the LLM or Google, for example. They would need to scrape our website for the info to show how does that integrate with their website T's and C's. I think you can define what pages and content it can use and what it can't. So there's just certain things that I think you can set which pages it should not consume, which is where you might have confidential stuff or IP and other things that you can, I'm guessing.
Yeah, you can put exclusions in there that says what you don't want is obviously a competitor coming over and scraping your website and taking all of that stuff for it. So you can add in, you can basically caveat saying you can scrape it if you are XYZ, but you can't scrape it if this. I mean, you just tweak your T's and C's to basically say, look, some things can be scraped and some things can't. You retain the right. Just always remember that that data belongs to you, and you retain the right as to what is done with it or is being done with it. So effectively what you're trying to do is you're trying to say, okay, it's fine, but I'm giving you, Google, a license to go and scrape this stuff, to go and do it. But effectively, if I choose that this is not in my interests or your interests, then make sure that the control lies with you. Because what you don't want to do, and what we have seen, for example, with one of our clients, they're an HR business, setting up a program, and effectively somebody else has come along and scraped the website, and basically taken all the information and then created their own website with the same information. I mean, it's like almost a mirror. At that point in time, IP is one of the biggest and hardest things and most expensive things to fight, because then you have cease and desist letters. Then you have to say, this is, you're passing off all my information. You're trying to copy me. Yeah. It then becomes a pain.
It's going to become more and more prolific, right? As it gets easier to reproduce websites, web apps, etc. The most important thing, or the most valuable thing that helps you stand out as a business, is some degree of content or IP. Like a HR program or templates or whatever it might be. So tricky. Yeah. Cool.
Now if I can get this to change. Is it changing? Come on, change. There you go. Oh no, hang on. Can you which site can you see? You can see.
Yeah, no,
that one.
Yeah, you're on the old one, the original one.
Right, now I need to move forward. Oh, there you go. Right. Okay, sorry about that. Clearly I'm useless at dealing with tech. So what are your must-haves? Your founder agreements, basically. By that I mean your shareholders agreement, your IP ownership. By that I mean your director service contracts, and a basic customer contract. I'd say those are your day one. I should probably have added in data privacy policy in there, but when you're talking about contracts, data privacy policy isn't a contract. Those are your kind of day one. Okay, let's be honest, quarter one. Let's not get too excited over this. Your quarter one basic contracts that you should have in place. Stage dependent, your hiring structures, IR35, contractors, consultancy agreements, employment contracts. Those are kind of your next things. Data protection maturity. So you go from your 3 to your 5, 6, 7 whole data world. And be investor ready. Being investor ready is something that we spend a lot of time doing. So whether it's being exit ready or investor ready, it's pretty much the same thing. It's the same kind of due diligence. So the example I always give is, I have a teenage daughter and her room is an utter mess. Can't find anything. No idea where she says, oh, it's in there somewhere, right? That is the same idea as an investor coming in and looking at your documents. They will go, this is a mess. So you need to be very organized about your documentation, and A, have it for a start, B, know where it is, and C, be able to explain it. It will speed up your investment 1,000 times. And if you're going for exit, it will make it so much easier. So you probably all heard of data rooms. It's the same thing. A data room for investment, a data room for exit is pretty much the same. They're looking for the same information. And that's what you need to have in your mind, is be very organized and say, here are my accounts, here are my contracts, here are my service agreements, here's my shareholders agreement. Just be very organized about it and review it. Keep them reviewed. As your business grows, keep them reviewed every 2 years, I would say. Just have somebody look over them, because your business changes. What you're doing changes. So what you did 6, 7 years ago, legally, they might need to change. We all know the Employment Rights Act has come into force, so all your employment contracts will all need changing right now. So just bear that in mind. Just to have a review, plan a review every 2 to 3 years to make sure things are up to date. And your relationships might have changed. You might have brought on a new founder, somebody might have left, you might have got divorced. All of those sorts of things you need to think about. And then your nice to have later, your complex structuring, your fully bespoke terms, compliance frameworks, policy frameworks, all of that kind of stuff. Once you're turning over about $1 million, that's when I'd say do that. But before that, I would definitely say must have day one, quarter one. Make sure you've got that in place. And stage dependent will depend on where you're at.
Okay. Cool.
Right. So what we have done, if this works, go on, work. Oh, right. It's not working.
The tech wizard.
The tech wizard. I'm clearly the lawyer, not the tech wizard. Come on, do that. Work.
What is going on?
No, that one. Go back. Right, there you go. If you guys can take a screenshot of that, that will lead you to a series of questionnaires that we have created for you guys, which basically looks at the foundations of your business, which covers corporate, commercial, employment, data protection, and there's one more. Nikki, remind me, I can't remember. But yeah, corporate, commercial, data protection, and employment.
Okay.
And IP. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Nikki. And they are effectively a checklist. So they're a checklist to work through what you may or may not already have. It's a really good way of kind of working through and thinking, what do I need to have in place? Once you've completed those checklists, and you can do them one at a time, some of them are slightly longer than others, so apologies. But then what we do is we take that information and we'll create a report for you that analyzes the gaps that you have. So your strengths and your weaknesses, what you should have in place, and what we can do for you. We'll give you a fixed fee for it, spread out over time. So it basically enables you to go, right, this is where there are gaps, and this is how I need to plug them, and then we can work with you. And as I said, it's a marathon, not a sprint, so you can put it out over time. But these founder fundamentals are really a kind of an audit to where you are at with your business right now, and they will let you know kind of we will let you know at what stage you're at and what you need to upgrade and what you need to think about, to avoid you falling into a pit later on. Basically, that's a key thing.